recording button. So welcome to the monthly Academy for Couples Therapists question and answer Zoom call. Um, I never know how many people will be attending, and so I always try to prepare something to talk about in case either few people or no people attend. I wish I just hadn't said that because I want people to attend. So I don't want people to give the impression that it's okay not to attend. But however, I know people are using the academy in very different ways, and that some people just listen to the lesson, some people just listen to the audio of the session, some people attend the Q&A, and some people don't. So um, anything is okay. I just know that I prepare some things, and today I want to talk a bit more about infidelity and the phases of the treatment, since this is the subject of the audio.
Okay.
But I'm going to start by asking if you have any questions. Um,
Not today. I think I'll probably have questions after you talk some more, but right now,
okay,
off the top of my head, I don't.
okay.
So
I want
maybe,
to say thank you. I want to say something else about attending the Zoom calls, that some people don't attend in part because I believe this may be happening, that they haven't heard the lesson or they haven't heard the audio of the session. And I think some people who have told me in the past that they get something important out of the Zoom call, even if they haven't. So that may be another thing to consider.
Mhm.
So I want to, before I talk a bit more about the treatment plan and the phases of the treatment plan when you're working with a case that has infidelity, is that I want to say that in the next module, in module 9, you'll be hearing a session. Actually, you'll be hearing two sessions from a young couple that is struggling with making decisions, and some of their intrapsychic some of the intrapsychic issues of one of the members of the couple. I think you'll enjoy that one. And the lesson on module 9 is part 1 of something I'm calling neuroscience and couples therapy. So what is it that every couples therapist needs to know about neuroscience and about how to explain what's happening in the brain to a couple? So that's part 1. Module 10 will have part 2. Back to module 8, which is our topic of today, the the lesson is about EFT, which is emotionally focused therapy, the framework proposed by Susan Johnson. And the tool that I have in the toolbox is related to EFT, which is a feelings that precede behaviors tool, which I think I have used with many, many couples, and they find it extremely helpful and interesting. And I'm going to talk more about how to use it and when to use it. Um, okay, so starting with the treatment plan for infidelity, um, I want to talk about the difference between the first phase and the second phase. So there's a lot to do in the first phase of the infidelity treatment. You've heard some of that in the session with the couple, um, and in so I just want to put some words around what happens in the first phase of the infidelity treatment. Um, so I call this the stabilization phase. It takes very little to get them stabilized, like in this example of module 8, or it takes a very long time to get them stabilized. So they have done an enormous, I mean, the couple of this module has done an enormous amount of work prior to my meeting with them. And by the way, it sounds like they're not meeting for the first time, but this was the first time that we met. And they are referring to another therapist that they saw, which is where the infidelity, I believe, was disclosed. But it's not me. So if you got confused, I apologize. So back to the first phase of the treatment, this is a trauma-based treatment. And so, you know, the person who is discovering the infidelity is traumatized, has a form of PTSD, may have sleeping issues, may have eating issues, may have trouble concentrating, just the whole life feels upended. And so a big part of the work here is to stabilize that and to do damage control. And one of the ways to do damage control is what I do in the session, which is to allow for questions. But in this case, they were able to do it right away. But usually I have to drip that and contain the anxiety of doing it quickly. So the you know, the discomfort, the anxiety, the devastation is so huge that they want to get rid of these feelings. So a big part of it is they help them tolerate the negative feelings that they have about themselves and about each other in the first phase of the treatment. So if they can tolerate those negative feelings, they will have a much better time at spacing out what they talk about and how they talk about it. Now, I must say from the outset, though, that infidelity occurs, in my personal clinical experience, much more often in conflict avoidant couples than in high conflict couples. It is an experience that I've had of, in this case, the infidelity was done by the female partner, and that is not uncommon at all, but it's not as common as the one from the male partner. But in any event, both members of the couple, or at least one, is severely conflict avoidant, and oftentimes that is one of the precursors of the infidelity. It's not the only one. As Esther Perel says, even in couples that are doing well, infidelity does take place. So it's not the only one. I just don't see those in the office. So I don't know if that means that, I don't know. I could speculate about what that means, but in my office, I would say that 90% of the couples that I see are conflict avoidant. Of course, there's the other one, which is the, let's say the man who, is using prostitutes or is using, the felony lies that are prevalent and have had multiple affairs. So again, I'm not saying those don't exist. I'm just saying I don't see as much as those in my practice, although I've seen some. In dealing or thinking about infidelity, I think one of the things to think about is what kind is it? So it's really important, just like with any other issue, not to think that all infidelity is the same. Is this an infidelity situation with a couple that is otherwise doing fairly well? Is this an infidelity situation of a pervasive felony lie kind of person, on the part of one person doing these felony lies on a persistent basis? Or is this an offshoot of many years of conflict avoidance, and this is just one of the consequences of it? So I do believe it's important to assess what kind of infidelity it is, just like you would assess everything else. You can't put them all in the same bucket. But continuing with the first phase, so this is trauma, this is PTSD, there's the damage control of the damage bond. The other piece of the damage control is to think about who the members of the couple are talking to. This is an often overlooked question. Who are they talking to and what advice are they getting? This is a very important piece of the work to contain the damage. I've seen people post on social media. I've seen people go to an attorney. I've seen people talk to, reveal, never reveal about their marriage to their sister or brother. And all of a sudden now they're spilling out their beans and saying everything, sort of like as a counter to all the years of protecting the partner, protecting themselves. So it's very important to find out who are they talking to and what are they hearing, because those people are part of the treatment process. So when we think of a treatment with a couple, we can't just think of the couple in isolation. We have to think of them as being in context out in the world with other family members and attorneys, and social media is another relationship nowadays. So we got to think about all of those things and what they're doing and what advice they're getting, and to process, and how do you think about what they're saying and what do you want to do? Do you think it's a good idea to continue talking to them or continue posting, and why yes and why not, and what do you think you need to do to protect the bond? So so let's say if in this case where the female partner that has the infidelity, and well, let me give you a different example. So in the example of a case where the guy was the person who had the affair, the woman is complaining that he didn't protect the relationship. And I think that's a very good word to use. Do you think you're protecting your relationship when you spill the beans, or when you post on social media, or when you talk to X, Y, and Z? And of course, the other issue is whether they want to stay together or not, but they may not. So, okay, so I'm switching now to assessing who they're talking to another issue, which is assessing whether or not they want to stay together. And about that one, I have to say, they may not know the answer to that yet, and it's okay not to know the answer. And as you may have heard me say to this couple, about 50% of people do recover and restructure their relationship, and the other 50 do not. And it's too early to know which way it's going to go. In most cases, it's too early to know. In part, I wish that I hadn't been so, whenever I listen back to what I do in these sessions, I think about, wow, I was really prescriptive. I wish I hadn't been that prescriptive in terms of predicting that they were going to stay together. It so happens that they do. I mean, I've been seeing them for almost a year now, and they're doing great. But I didn't really know anything about them when I first met them. So I think it was a little premature of me to be saying to them that they would stay together. But maybe I saw some things in that first session that I normally don't see. So again, normally I would say it's too early to know if you're going to stay together, and that's okay. And I do also say in the very beginning, it's okay not to know, and let's give it 3 to 6 months. So I give a little bit of a window, here of opportunity to mull over the outcome. And I also think, and I sometimes say this to other couples, even if you decide not to stay together, having 6 months of couples therapy with me will make the decision be, if you decide to go the separation or divorce route, you'll have a better divorce or a better separation if you do some work here. And so I do say that. I say that to many couples that I'm doing discernment counseling with, for example. So even if you decide not to stay together, you'll have a better separation. I mean, I strongly believe that, and I have seen that. So back to the first phase. So I'm talking about trauma, damage control, I'm talking about who they talk to as part of the treatment process. I'm talking about not knowing whether or not they'll stay together. And the next thing I want to talk about is um, that what this individual mentioned in the session, which is I need her to hear the effect and the impact that this had on me. And so this is the beginning of a restructuring of the relationship where if they've had trouble with conflict, if they have trouble with differentiation, if they've had trouble with self-defining and having the other person hear how they impacted, then this is a good opportunity to begin that process. So within that first stabilization period of the treatment process, I think this is one of the most important steps, to be able to have the person who didn't have the infidelity to access his or her own feelings about it, his feelings of insecurity, his feelings of being stupid, his feelings of being of not being able to trust his own intuition, his feelings of the discombobulating feeling that it has when they find out, oh, so when you said you were doing this, you were actually doing X. Oh, and so how much of an idiot can I be to have believed you? So a big piece of the process is to be able to, A, help the person who, I hate to call him victim, so I'm trying not to do that. The person who was the subject of the infidelity to be, to process his, in this case, his own feelings of insecurity, of unworthiness, of incompetence, of doubting his own internal thought process and feelings and intuition. That's a very important part of the work in the beginning, in front of the other partner, so that in this case she can hear it. And the after and the impact. So I was talking about two different things is the work here. The first one is the intrapsychic work of accessing the feeling of incompetence and stupidity, and B, accessing the impact. And this is part of the impact. So what I'm finding out is that what you were doing is making me feel like an idiot. It's making me feel like accessing the impact. The feelings will lead to an articulation of the impact of the discovery of the infidelity. So it's obvious that a big part of this is the management of anxiety. And you hear me do that a lot in the session. How anxious are you now? On a scale of 1 to 10, what would make you less anxious? Is this making you more anxious or less anxious? So the assessment of the anxiety and the management of the anxiety, both in and out of the session, is important. You hear me doing that with him too. What would make it easier for you? Are you sleeping? No. Are you having trouble falling asleep or staying asleep? Well, I'm having trouble staying asleep. So he said, so I asked him, can you write down what you're thinking that is not allowing you to go back to sleep? So I just do a very, very elemental managing of anxiety here with him, very quickly, very, very elemental and not very deep. But it's about, and the other piece of the management of anxiety is what you hear me say, which is, okay, schedule the meetings and schedule the beginning and the end of the meetings. That's a big part of the management of anxiety. So know when the meetings are going to happen, because it's important to prepare your partner for the questions. So A, know your questions and what you want to talk about, and B, prepare your partner for the question. So she is so eager and so ready that she doesn't seem to be somebody who needs a whole lot of preparation. But I have to tell you, in my experience, Most people want to know when the onslaught is going to come. And so the onslaught of accusations or the onslaught of negative feelings or the onslaught of revelations of impact feels like an onslaught to the person who had the affair. And so preparing the person who had the affair, and of course, you know, the one who didn't have the affair is thinking, well, why should I worry about her feelings? She didn't worry about mine. Well, this is the beginning of a processing of how to be in a better relationship. So you're, even though you may not say it that way, but managing the anxiety, managing the preparedness of the partner for hearing the onslaught of the accusations and the impact, preparing the partner to hear, you know, he has some responsibility in being heard. So if he wants to be heard, he needs to prepare her. Now, this is my bread and butter, right? You want your partner to hear you, you need to tell them what you want to say and when, which is why I talk about headlines. What's the headline about what you want to say? What is the outcome that you want to have? Of these conversations. So you didn't hear me do this in this session because I didn't need to, but in other sessions, in other first sessions or in beginning phases of the treatment, I would say, what is it that you want to get out of the conversation? What is it that you want her to understand? What is it that you are hoping she will get that she didn't get so far, you know, yet? So and the answer could be, I just want to vent. The answer could be, I just want her to understand my position, my feelings, my point of view. The answer could be, I just got very insecure this morning or last night when I watched, I got triggered last night. We watched a show together and there was an infidelity case and one of the actors was, you know, there was an infidelity situation and I got triggered and I remember and I got flooded and I felt like blasting her. So I just want her to know that I got triggered. So this is a big part of the first phase of the treatment process when you're helping the one who is the most impacted emotionally by the infidelity to manage when to say things, how to say them, and to understand what outcome he or she wants from that conversation. That's a big part of the first phase, which is a preparation for using the dialogue. I think I'm going to stop now. And yeah, so I want to, you know, oftentimes in the modules, the lesson and the session are not connected. I think today I can make a connection between the session and the lesson because, you know, in this session, he's talking about, I didn't get triggered. I was, you know, we live under the same roof. We function well together. I used to get triggered when I thought she wasn't telling me the truth, but now that I know the truth, I actually feel relieved. So that is this case. In other cases, it may not be relief at all. It may be the opposite. It may be the first time that even though their intuition told them something was wrong, their finding out is really a blow to the self-esteem, to the you know, to the security, to the bond. I mean, it's a big blow. And so they get triggered, and a big piece of it is to help them understand the feeling under the feeling under the anger, which is what EFT is so good at doing, and what the tool that I have is so good for too. So, you know, to help somebody go through the feeling, like so anger is your first reaction, and what you're angry because, well, because I feel stupid, because I feel incompetent, because I feel that I can't trust her, but I also can't trust my own. So this is what you're trying to get them to tell you in front of the other partner so the partner can hear them. So now I'm going to stop and see if anybody has any questions.
I was just thinking about some of my clients that have a lot of shame, especially clients that are, have a history of substance abuse or been traumatized, and they really struggle with their partner talking to them about their feelings, and it puts, kind of puts them on the defensive, and they kind of go off the rails or, get really depressed. I have a couple of these type of clients, and they really have a hard time accepting responsibility. And the partner gets frustrated because they're not able to take responsibility, whether it's due to porn or infidelity or using drinking, all those things. To them, it's that same wounds, betrayal. And so how do you deal with that better, and that shame process, and help them to be able to take responsibility better?
Okay, great question. I'm going to talk a little bit about this, and then we'll see. Do you want to, Monica, do you want to ask me a question too?
Yeah, I think as I was listening, I mean, this couple, like the wife just seemed unusually eager and confident to answer the questions. Like it's like she's discovered some kind of self-help program that or something. Like it was yeah.
She did.
Yeah, it's a very interesting situation. Which made me, I was sort of suspicious, like, well, what is their relationship really like? Like, why is he so willing to be okay with her? Like, it just made me suspicious, which isn't really a question. My question is that my experience with a couple where there's infidelity has been that it's the husband is incredibly conflict avoidant. And so that even when there is time and sessions where there is the possibility for good conversation, he's so focused on making sure that she knows he didn't mean it, and that she knows his intentions were something else, and that she knows how it accidentally or whatever, because it's around porn, and that he can't ever really get to something that feels real about him. And so she's constantly dissatisfied because he's so busy trying to make sure that she knows that he cares about her and didn't mean it and didn't mean to hurt her, which
okay, great,
really
great
hard to
question.
break through.
Great question. So let me address the first one first. Actually, I want to make a comment about you being suspicious about him. So he, they both did a lot of work. They have both been in individual therapy, self-help groups. They've done a lot of work, and he doesn't want to lose the marriage. And he knows that he's been a pleaser and wants to get out of that role. And a big part of the work was to stop being that. And so that this may be relevant to your question. So we'll get to that. But let me address the first one first. So Jane, I tend to do a lot of work around the difference between shame and guilt. And I ask questions about that. I explain the difference and I ask questions about that. So the difference, the way I explain it sometimes, it just depends on the case, but I might explain it by saying that shame is, I'm a bad person, I'm a terrible person, and guilt is, I feel bad about what I did. And so that's the first thing that comes to my mind when you're talking about that, because I don't, in the context of couples therapy, I deal with the guilt first and the shame later, if at all. If I were to think about it, that, I don't know that I've ever thought about it that way, but I tend to deal, because the guilt is interpersonal and the shame is intrapsychic. So, and I say it that way, shame is your own internal struggle. And I don't know I don't even know if I'm going to use the word shame, because I mean, you used it, Jane, but I don't know if you think your clients use it. So, you have to kind of use the language that you think they're comfortable with. I don't know. I mean, I've seen some men being very ashamed, but I don't know that I often use that word, because I use whatever word it is that will access that feeling without using the word. Sometimes it is the word, but sometimes it isn't. So, I mean, it could be feeling like a loser. It could be feeling incompetent. It could be feeling, um, um, like I'm failing. All of those are shame based. So you got to identify what, and they're intrapsychic, because they have to do with their own trauma. They have to do with their own attachment history. And you can't, I'm not saying you can't do anything about it. I'm saying that's not the first order of business. And so I would say that when if I can talk somebody into willingness to do something about the guilt, then I have a better chance of helping that. Is this a woman that is so ashamed that it's being put on the defensive, that has a hard time accepting responsibility, or is that a guy? I just want to know.
My latest ones are men. I've had women too that, seem to deflect and not really want to take in too much of the responsibility or accept, what they've done, and they get defensive, and
Right.
it's hard for them. They'll get triggered and they'll shut down. I have one that just kind of walks away. We've been talking about teaching him to calm himself. But yeah, I have a couple
Okay.
different ones like that.
Okay, so just want to say a couple more things about that question. So I believe that our interventions are only as effective as the clients buy into them. And so we need to prepare clients for the intervention. And so the intervention that I'm going to talk about is, okay, you need to be hearing him. Let's say it's a him who gets defensive and it's a her who wants the answers. So I would say to him, part of becoming a part of having a better relationship is to be able to listen to your partner without getting defensive and without counterattacking. And that's just the definition, one of the definitions of a dialogue. When your partner initiates a conversation, and I can help your partner initiate better so that she or he, depending on the situation, doesn't start by blasting, which is where all the preparation for the conversation starts, where all the, you have a role to play. Anyway, so there's some education and preparation for the initiator of the complaint, the concern, or the problem, or the conversation. But the preparation for the listener is, if you want to be in a better relationship, you're going to have to do this. You're going to have to figure this out. You're going to have to figure out how to listen to her without counterattacking, becoming defensive. So I first talk about the goal. I don't present the intervention without a buy-in. So I talk about the goal. What does it mean to be in a collaborative? What does it mean to be in an equal, collaborative, and whatever? What word do you want to say? Good relationship. What does it mean to do? What does it require of you to be able to be in a good relationship? And did you have that? Well, now's the time. If you don't do it now, I can guarantee I cannot, this is one of the things I said. I cannot guarantee you'll have a better relationship even if you do this, but I can guarantee nothing will change if you don't. So I get very focused on what each of them needs to do differently. And I say, are you willing to try them? Are you willing to do that? Okay, let me go back to the guilt issue for a second before I ask you to reflect or comment on what I'm saying. The guilt issue, the reason why it's important is because in one of my descriptions of what it is to be in a good relationship, so some of them may say a few things, right? They may say, I don't know what they'll say. I don't know what people say. I need to be in a good relationship is to be collaborative or negotiate or have good stuff. I don't know what people say. People say all kinds of things, and I write those down, and I generally agree with them. But I say, lack of guilt is not one of them. Lack of guilt is not part of the description of a good relationship. You will feel guilty when you do some things. And the way to correct them is to listen to the impact your behavior had on your partner and to figure out a way of compensating for that behavior. But the first order of business is to hear it. And most of us did not grow up in a family and don't have models for listening to the feedback of another person and making a change in response to the feedback. Most of us did not grow up with that. So what you're being asked to do here is something, A, you don't have a model for, and B, you don't know how to do that. I can help you with that. Because again, I can guarantee that if you don't do this, you're not going to have a good relationship, but I can't guarantee that if you do this, you will. Anyway, I'm going to stop now. Any questions or comments subsequent to what I'm saying?
I think that makes sense. I think framing it that way might help, but I still think that probably I'm going to have to do a lot of repeating of that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because they'll go like that and just flip out, and leave the room or start yelling or whatever. I mean,
Good. I'm so glad you're saying that. So yes, repetition, permission. Do I have your permission to interrupt when I see you getting bent out of shape in the session? Do I have your permission to help you figure out how to listen better? Do I have your permission? Can I do that when I see you? And you do have to name it. When I see you becoming defensive, when I see you becoming disruptive, when I see you becoming flooded, and in lesson 9, you'll see part 1 of what's going on in the brain and why it is important too. This is why, okay, let me back up for a second. So in the beginning stages of a treatment, no matter what kind of treatment it is, whether it's infidelity or not, the parameters of psychoeducation need to be set up. So you need to be able to talk about what it is to be in a collaborative relationship and how far they are from that, or what it is that what happens in the brain. So let me just talk about those two. So what is a good relationship? And what do you need, what do you individually need to do to contribute to that good relationship? And how far is it from what you've done so far? So in a case like the one you're describing with shame and guilt, I would say you're not someone who, I would just adjust what is a good relationship based on what they're not doing. Like in this case, I would say you haven't tolerated hearing from your partner without getting bent out of shape. I would just say it that way. And so I would put that on the list of the things that need to happen. So in other words, in the beginning of the treatment, what you want is to understand the distance between where they are and where you need them to go. Between where they are and where they want to go with your help. So they will tell you, I want to be a better person. I want to be a better partner. I don't want to be doing this. I hate it when I do this, but I can't stop myself or whatever. But if or they need to give you a vision of where they want to go, so that you can see the distance between what they're doing or not doing and what they need to be doing or not doing when they get better. So that distance needs to be spelled out. And so that's a big part of the psychoeducation in the beginning. Where do they want to go? How far they are from there? What will it require of each of them individually to be able to do that? And then what happens that they can't is generally a conversation about the brain. And so when they get flooded, when they get triggered, when they get upset, it's because their brain is involved. And we can talk more after you hear lesson part 1 and part 2 of lesson 9 and 10 about what you can do. That I don't want to get into that, but I mean, not that I don't want to. I'm just saying we can. I think people. I'm just going to be very quick about it. People get into higher brain. I'm sorry. People get into lower brain, and there is no way in hell, and I say it that way, they're going to be able to have a productive conversation if they don't figure out a way of getting back into higher brain. So that's how I say it. There's no way they're going to be able to have a conversation. So when somebody leaves, I actually, I might say in this case, that's a good thing. You're protecting yourself from, I would be proud of it. I would frame that as a positive thing, because that means they're stopping a conversation that's not going well. The question is, can they resume it when they're in higher brain? And most people don't resume and don't have a second one. But the idea is, can you stop a conversation that's not going well? And when you leave, that means you're trying to disengage from a conversation that's not going well. Does that help with your second part of the question about the persistence? And the answer is yes. It takes a lot of work to get them there.
Yeah. I have clients that I'm thinking of specifically right now, there's a huge history of substance abuse by the husband, even though it's not. I know you're talking about infidelity, but to her it's an infidelity. It feels
Right.
betrayal because he's lied and cheated for his girlfriend, the drug. So for her it's that infidelity, and we've gotten to a pretty good place. I mean, they seem like they're handling things well, but they just don't want to move into him taking responsibility. We've kind of danced around it. We get closer, and as soon as she starts talking about that, he starts getting upset and blowing up. He has a really strong history of being emotionally abused as a child and trauma, and so for him it's really hard, and just trying to keep him in the room. And now she's trying to avoid, and they're saying, oh, we should come every other week, things are better. I'm like, but you haven't really addressed some of the major
so
issues.
That's a great point, Jane, that you're making, which is that you know what needs to happen. You're the one who knows where you want to take them. Stick with that. Don't ignore what you want. You want them to go through this process where he takes responsibility. And one of the ways to do that is to look at the apology protocol that's on, I don't remember the module. I was actually thinking about making a list of all the tools and where in the modules they are now that we're getting closer to the 12. But I don't remember right now. Do you remember, Monica, and what module the apology protocol is? Is it 6 or 7?
I was thinking it was 5.
Okay. Oh yeah, you're right. It could be 5. Maybe, Jane, you don't have access to that. So let me send it to you. I'll send you the apology protocol, and I think you'll get a good idea, because the most important part of this phase of the treatment is for them to take responsibility and articulate the impact that this had on the partner. So if the goal is to berate him, he's not going to go for it. But if the goal is, so see if you can reframe the goal here and get him to, understand and articulate the impact of how he hurt her. So yeah, that would be, that's the one thing I can say. I hope this is helpful, and I'll send it to you. And then you can ask me any questions, and feel free to reach out to me if you have questions about the apology letter, because I believe it has to be done in writing. And I prepare couples for that. I prepare the one who did it and is not admitting in individual sessions to get a buy-in of the apology letter. And I think it needs to be written. And the most important piece is the impact statement. And so I prepare them to do that. And when I prepare them and they do it, it's amazing the results that it has in the other partner. Amazing. If you stick with the program, you might see it when it gets to module 5 again. Anyway, so let me turn to Monica's question about the incredibly conflict avoidant guy. So, right. So the work here is to connect his fear of honesty with his lying. So, and also to, again, underscore where he was and where he wants to be, and to fill in the trajectory, like what needs to happen. So you want a more honest relationship. You want a more whatever. What is he going to say? If you ask him what kind of relationship he wants, what do you know what he would say?
He says he wants one where
She's happy.
I'm sorry?
Where she's happy.
Where she's what?
Where she's happy. He wants one that makes her happy.
Yes,
Right.
that's it.
Right. So, okay. So one thing I'm thinking of is, so he is selfless.
Pretty much.
And right. And so
I've encouraged him with the times when he has lied about something. They're not huge things, but I'll say, maybe you really, he was gonna not buy a computer because they didn't have the money yet, but then he found one he really wanted. He bought it anyway. And I said, and he went through a whole long thing about why it happened the way it happened. and that it wasn't because he just wanted to do that. He had to, whatever, whatever. And I said, what if you just said, I just wanted it and it made me angry that I couldn't get it and I just wanted to get it anyway. And he just couldn't even consider that. And the same thing with porn. I said, well, what if you just said, this isn't something I feel like I want to stop. I'm going to do it. I
Right.
want to watch porn. It makes me angry. And he's like, but I don't want to.
You
So-
don't want to do it?
Mhm.
Oh,
Even though
Right.
he does.
right. So the work here is to slow down the repair of the marriage and to do a lot of work with him on the selfishness and selflessness continuum.
Mm.
So talk about what does it feel like? So again, you know very well where you have to take him. What you don't have is his buy-in. You know where he has to go. He has to become more selfish. But he doesn't have that buy-in yet. So you're not going to make progress with that. So one thing to do is to access what's wrong with selfishness. What's wrong with wanting what you want? Give me a history, and I may have talked to you about this or others about this before, where I do the history of money or the history of wishes or the history of wanting a different career. So you need to go back and find out where the trauma is about this. So some of it is, and this is a little bit intrapsychic because I don't think he's going to get better interpersonally. I mean, this is kind of the opposite of what I was saying earlier. I don't think he's going to get better interpersonally if he can do some of this intrapsychic work about who he is, what he wants. And some people can do this with you, with the couples therapist. Some people cannot do this with the couples therapist. I have seen in my clinical practice, I believe that the majority of the cases in heterosexual couples are about aggressive women and conflict avoidant men, or the two are conflict avoidant. And so there is some preparation work for the couple's relationship work that gets at what is this going to take from you? And, again, you can begin to have this dialogue about something I say often is collaboration, compromise, and negotiation is crucial for any relationship for any adult intimate relationship to occur, but it's not going to happen until you can self-define. And so when you say, this is a foreign concept to me, part of me, this is how I would talk to him, part of me wants to tell you, I want to understand why. What's so damaging about self-defining, about knowing your own wishes, your own concerns, and being able to articulate them? What happened to you with that? What happened to you when you wanted something, when you were growing up? And sometimes conflict avoidance comes from very strict religious backgrounds. Sometimes it comes from very undifferentiated families, meaning parents who expected things from, who had what Carl Rogers, of all people, 60 years ago called conditions of worth. You're only worth it to me if you're good athletically. You're only worth it to me if you get good grades, because your athleticism or your good grades are a reflection of me being a good parent. So this is the history that you need to go back to understand. Was there a conditions of worth kind of environment? Was it a difficulty accepting that he had different wishes? Or what happens also is that one child was one child was the heartbreaker of the parent's heart, and so this child became the fixer. This child became the pleaser. This child became, I'm going to sacrifice myself. Because what I'm hearing from what you're saying is self-sacrifice. I'm going to self-sacrifice everything about me for the good of the other. And so some people, when they begin to hear me talk about this, some people say, isn't that the way it's supposed to be in a relationship? Some people have that reaction. And then I continue to educate them. So again, remember what I said earlier today, you as the couples therapist know where you want to take them. But what's frustrating is that they don't buy into that. So you need to do some preparation. This is where I want you to go. Can I take you there? I will take you by the hand. I will help you. I will repeat it. I will persist. But this is where we're going. Are you with me?
Mhm. Yeah, and I think that's helpful because as you're saying that, I'm thinking I was like, why isn't he buying in? Because he seems genuinely engaged, but I think our hang up is that he's I suppose has been diagnosed for quite some time with ADHD, but for whatever reason medication does not he doesn't react well to medication. So he has ADHD, and he really, like, it quite often comes up that whatever it is that's happening, like the impulsivity or the lack of concentration or focus or whatever it is, um, has to do with his ADHD. And so there's some sort of out about it, like, well, it's this, and he has gotten a therapist for himself about that. But I think the thing is, the ADHD aside, like there are ways to do that, but I think that's the thing that keeps him from buying into it's really about him needing to be different intrapsychically.
And that's not relational either. So what,
Right.
right? So I have a client that is doing exactly the same thing. I have executive functioning issues, but he makes agreements that he doesn't follow, and the wife wants to kill him. And it's not because of his executive functioning issues, although that may be a part of it. And I explained that to him today. That's A, but B, you're not being relational. What does it mean to be relational? It means to have a self and to know the self of your partner, both. It means both.
Mhm.
To be relational means to be able to take into account both what you want and what your partner wants at the same time. Both, but I was just explaining this to them. This comes out of the developmental model and the Bohemian model. It comes out of the model for differentiation. What does it mean to be relational? It means to be able to tolerate that what you want is different than what your partner wants, and that is okay. Because what there is behind the history of a self-sacrificing man is that either it wasn't okay to want something different, or this was a self-imposed it not being okay to want something different in response to what he considered the expectations of the parent. So waking up from the spell of childhood is in a way to be able to self-define and 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 being able to tolerate the self-definition of your partner. Because when you grow up and you don't have that ability to self-define and tolerate the self-definition of your parent, and in a hierarchical relationship, that doesn't happen. It's what the parents want or what you think your parents want, or it's about obligation and guilt and not disappointing your parents, or the opposite, or rebelling against it, right? So, but that's neither one of those is a grown-up position. A grown-up, a growth agenda, a developmental growth agenda to get out of that childhood spell. I'm either going to acquiesce or I'm going to rebel. And check to see if he had a very rebellious brother, because that might be it. The developmental growth agenda is, how do I say what I want and tolerate and find out what my partner wants? And it's okay if we don't want the same thing, but negotiation, collaboration, compromise is not going to come, which that's what I call problem solving. Problem solving is never, ever going to occur if you don't know what it is you want and can articulate it to your partner. And if you don't know what it is your partner wants and he or she can articulate it to you. And so this is not an easy buy-in. It's not an easy buy-in, and it's the bread and butter of our work with conflict avoidant men.
Yeah, that's really helpful. It's very helpful.
So glad to hear that.
Yeah. I mean,
Uh,
it also crosses over into several other, there's a lot of conflict avoidant.
oh yeah, there's a lot of conflict avoidant women, and
Yes.
and I mean the same principle actually applies to. So the couple I was working with this morning, actually, he has this rebellious. I was explaining what I just said to you, and I was explaining this to them, and I said, but this undifferentiation, Bowen would call it fusion. You know, like the merging of the brains. They think they have to both be the same and think the same and want the same because difference is so threatening. I said, but it shows up differently in you, male partner. It shows up as, I'm going to do what I want. And I'm not going to do what you want. I'm just going to do what I want. And that's so it shows up in this rebellious streak. In her, it shows up in, you're wrong for not wanting to whatever chore she's wanting to do that morning. There's something wrong with you for not wanting to do what I want. And so, and then she gets aggressive. So she doesn't, I don't know that she would fit in the definition of a conflict avoidant partner. She would fit in the definition of the angry partner, the partner who thinks her partner is wrong for wanting something different than what she wants. So I don't know if that applies in this case, but it applies in many, many cases.
Yeah, well, it's the same lack of differentiation, just the opposite reaction.
Absolutely, right. Yeah. I want to move on to any other comments or questions, Jane or Monica, before I move on to a couple more things about the treatment plan for infidelity.
No, I'm good.
So I wanted to say, so one thing I didn't mention is that the first phase of the infidelity treatment, a lot of it is about grieving what was lost. So a lot of the anger of the betrayed partner. Oh, that's the word, betrayed partner. I often have trouble with the partner who, anyway. So that grieving, that part of the process is that the anger is a substitute or a stand-in for grieving. It's very, very, you know, what you get the betrayed, what you want to get the betrayed person to do is to be able to talk about what they lost. They lost the trust. They lost the ability to trust their own intuition. They lost the whether it was the illusion of a good relationship or whether it was a good relationship, it doesn't matter. They lost their idea of what it was that they wanted to, you know, to have. And so it's very important for the for the one who had the infidelity to be able to hear this, what was lost, both to be able to articulate that grieving and to be able to hear the grieving. And I think that's getting back to Jane's question, I think that's part of the work here in terms of the apology, that this is part of the impact. You know, in order for a good apology to occur, the impact needs to be very well spelled out. And they can do it individually first, and then you can have them, you can prepare the partner who tends not to be able to listen to it. And if that part gets processed, meaning the grieving, the impact, the trauma, then you can prepare the partner who did the betrayal to write the apology letter. And I have done this where, again, like any protocol, like any intervention, you have to get the buy-in. So a lot of times the partner says, I'm not ready to write it yet. I don't have enough information about the impact. So I introduce the idea, I have them process the idea, I send them the letter, the apology protocol, the steps, and that the ones I'm going to send you, Jane. And then the work is on preparing them to write the apology letter. That doesn't happen, you know, it's a process like everything else. They need to buy in. It's a process. It's an intervention. You know, what are the roadblocks? When you, I think it was module 5 actually, when we saw the 2 sessions where that happened with that couple, that they were able to write apology letters for each other. But it took a lot. I mean, it was not an easy process, and I almost gave up on it. And then I had them, you know, I met with each of them individually. I asked what the roadblocks are. I asked what would help them to do. I gave them more articles. I just did a lot of work to try to get them there, and then it had an incredible effect. So again, whenever you have interventions, remember they are very far from where you want, and you need their buy-in and get them ready for it and prepare them and understand the roadblocks and all that. I want to talk about EFT a little bit. But before I do that, I just want to say, so I was concentrating on the first phase of the treatment plan with a case with infidelity, and I didn't say anything about the second phase. I want to tell you that I am preparing a general phases of treatment for couples therapists, not just for infidelity, but in general. So I'll be talking about that in future modules, or I'll put that in the resource tab. But I think the second phase, speaking specifically about infidelity, the second phase is the one where each of them needs to accept their own contribution to the relationship problems. So this is the restructuring of the relationship. This is the beginning of the work on, well, you begin in phase 1, but you continue, you know, most of the work of phase 1 is on the betrayed, on the one who does the betrayal. The work on phase 2, and some people never get there, is on the work of both. So the betrayed has to be, if the relationship is going to survive and thrive, this is one thing I say, you know, some of the couples don't make it. If you're going to make it, this is what is going to happen. And so, for example, I have talked to some of you in the past about the concept of the lie invitee. So in the example that you're giving, Monica, she could be very well a lie invitee. The lie invitee is the one that invites the lies. So yes, the one that lies makes choice of lying, but the one that, but there is an interpersonal, interactional pattern in the lying. So some of it is intrapsychic. Let's remember always, well, there's intrapsychic things and there's interpersonal relational things. So some of the lying has to do with one of the partners being the lie invitee. How many times do you have, and this is very often women who say, I want him to tell you what he thinks. I need him to be more open. I want him to be more, you know, I want to have an emotional connection. I want him to be more intimate with me. And what does she do as soon as he does that? She says, you're thinking what? You want what? That's crazy. So that's never going to happen. So that I called a lie invitee. So this is the person who says one thing and does another. And so that's the second phase of the treatment process. If the relationship is going to get better, if they're going to move on, that piece needs to be addressed. And if she cannot tolerate that she has something to do with what happened here, the relationship is not going to go well. Any questions or comments about that?
I think it's, I mean, I just can see it in the developmental model because this is really about differentiation, because this is an undifferentiated wife who is an ally invitee because she thinks he should obviously think what she thinks. And if he can't say what he thinks, maybe it's just because of that, but he also isn't very differentiated, or he would never end up in that space.
That's right, exactly, which is why I keep talking about the difference between the intrapsychic and the interpersonal. And they're intertwined and they're hard to separate, but and it's hard to know which to work on first. Often it's hard to know which one to work on first. Right, so I had a case that was very dramatic. I mean, it was an incredibly difficult case. I could not stabilize her. There was no way. I worked with them for like 2 years. And they were on not only phase 1, but they were on the first week of phase 1. I was never able to get her to be emotionally stable enough to tolerate his process, and was very emotionally dysregulated, and said she wanted intimacy and was a typical lie invitee, and didn't see it and didn't want to see it no matter what I did. And this was an amazing case because they even went to a weekend with Terry Real, believe it or not, who said the same thing. And he and I talked. I mean, it was an amazing experience. And he and I saw the same things. And she ended up in a treatment program, in a 1-week treatment program for emotional regulation. And the treatment plan was spelled out, and Terry Real spelled it out for her, and I spelled it out for her. And I don't know what happened to them. So because at some point I said, I don't think we're making any progress. And that was like 2 years into it, and then they quit. So that, I'm not saying that all of these things get better. I don't know what happened to them. They might as well stay miserably married for the rest of their lives, or they might have separated. I have no idea what happened to them.
That sounds like the kind of case where this person has a trauma background that has to be dealt with before they can do anything, which may not be the case in that one, but I feel like I encounter that a lot. And I actually just recently, with regard to EFT, discovered that there's a specific book about EFT with trauma survivors that I'm interested to read, because I'm kind of desperate for when one acts that way and it's because of a trauma. But
Right.
I'm interested in knowing what that book is, if you don't mind, Monica.
Yeah, I think it's by it's by
It is by Susan Johnson.
Yeah, it's by Susan Johnson. It's EFT for trauma survivors or something like that.
If you have it, can you send Jane the link, or can you put it on the
Yeah.
Actually, why don't you send it to me and I'll send it to everybody.
Okay.
So
yeah.
that's kind of what I do at the end. So I send a link to some things.
Okay.
So the trauma in EFT book would be very helpful to a lot of people.
Yeah, I think that's what I was trying to get at, is that, so many clients, there's just such a trauma there. It's hard to work through that. And so that's why when I heard that book, I'm like, yeah, that would be awesome to know more about that.
Right. Right. So I want to move on to the feelings that precede and effective behaviors, which comes out of the EFT model, because I think that may further our conversation about how to deal with people who've had trauma histories. So I don't know if you had a chance to look at that document. Were you able to look at that document, feelings that precede and effective behaviors? So maybe I will share screen then. And hold on one second. It's in module 8. So I'm gonna open it up and show it to you and everybody else. And this will be connected to the trauma piece that we've been talking about. No, that's not what I want. There. I hope, yep, there we go. Okay, so this is the feelings that precede an effective behavior. So I believe that this is the way to access the traumatic events and traumatic and interpsychic issues. This is the way in. So I would stop, so that they tell me about a fight, or I see it. Either I see it or they tell me about it, and I say, okay, so I would like to be able to talk to you about what happened to you in that conversation and what triggered you. And so you want to get people to be able to tell you to pick one of these or all of these or 3. So if it's overwhelming, ask them to pick 3. I felt excluded. I felt powerless. I felt unheard. I felt scolded. I felt judged. I felt blamed. I felt disrespected. I felt uncared for, lonely, ignored, forgotten, unloved, unsafe, disconnected. So you get them to pick, I've had people say all of them, and I've had people really, really think and just say, I felt blamed. So in any case, I tried to get them to give me 3 or 4. Because I think we need a little more data than just one. And sometimes people have a hard time accessing how they felt. Again, this is what triggered you before you acted, before you disconnected, before you left, before you screamed, before you whatever. And I'll show you in a minute. But I help them identify the feeling. You could do this in an individual, or you can do this in a joint session. Now, once you have that, then you want to say, identify what ineffective behaviors you're most likely to exhibit, meaning what are you most likely to do, and put a circle around the word. Okay, so this is a little confusing, so just stay with me. And then complete the sentences of the circle behavior. So let me just go. This is a long list, very long list. It has like 20 items. And let's start with the first few. I get impatient when I feel one of these. But the first step is to circle what they do. So in other words, you're trying to separate really, really clearly how they feel from what they do. So In the first step, you're trying to get them to identify 2 or 3 or 4 feelings that when they get triggered. In the second step, you're trying to get them to circle 3, 4, 5 behaviors that they do. I get impatient. You know, what do you do in general when you're fighting? What do you do? I get impatient. I withdraw. I nag. I blame. I get defensive. I manipulate. I need to act like I'm right. I shame my partner. I interrupt. I use sarcasm. I become condescending. I intimidate. I get stubborn. I keep secrets. And on and on and on and on and on and on. I attack. I deny. I involve the kids in arguments. I yell. Have them read the whole thing in front of you or individually or at home, and have them circle the ones that they do the most. And I had one client when I first started using this who filled it all out. She did all of it. But again, that's overwhelming. That's hard to work with. So you want to access the trauma. So you just tell them to, and you can actually do it yourself. It's a very good one to do yourself. So you have them circle just 3. Let's say this person is a guy, and let's say he'll say, I withdraw when I feel blamed. I interrupt when I feel unheard. I keep secrets when I feel ignored. Okay? So now you have ignored, withdraw, and what did I say? Ignored, unheard.
And withdrawal. Oh.
No, that was the behavior.
Right, yeah.
Unheard, powerless. So let me just use an example. So you get the exercise, correct?
Mm-hmm.
To fill out 3, 4, 5, 6, with the feelings. And then you go back to the feeling. And let's say the feeling was powerless, unheard, and excluded. So that's when you access the trauma. And once you have that, then you go to how familiar for you is it to feel powerless, unheard, and excluded? How familiar is this feeling to you? And by familiar, I don't mean only have you felt this before. Let me stop the share. I don't mean have you felt this before, but also have you seen anybody feel this before? It's not just about you. So the trauma doesn't necessarily have to be, first of all, it doesn't necessarily even have to be parental. It could be peer related. It could be school related. It could be, who knows, pastor in the church related. I mean, who knows? So it depends on what the trauma is. But what you're trying to access is the familiarity with the feeling for themselves or for someone else, sibling, parent. A lot of times you hear they were witnesses to the violence. They were not the recipients of the violence. They were just the witnesses. So one thing we know is that being a witness to violence can make you, have the trauma response of powerlessness, unheard, and excluded. So this is the beginning of the axis of the trauma. If you want to do some of the trauma work, I think you'll find that the book that you're referring to will have somewhat a similar process where you're trying to get people to identify the feeling, then you're trying to get them to identify how they behave when they have the feeling. And then you try to, again, access the familiarity of the feeling. And that's when you go back and try to do some of the family of origin work and the trauma work, but you can do it yourself, or you can have somebody do it with somebody else, or you can have them do EMDR, or, depending on the situation. And then you can ask, when you're dealing with the actual behaviors, you can ask, did you see anybody do that? So when they begin to say, I blame, I disconnect, and I get defensive, did you see anybody do that? Or did you do that to somebody else and nobody stopped you? These are the Terry Real questions. Were you a witness to the behavior? Were you a recipient to the behavior? Did you see anybody do that to somebody else? Did somebody do that to you? Were you a witness? Were you a recipient? Or did the third one, which is very important too, that often gets overlooked, did you do that to somebody else and nobody stopped you? So those are the two ways to get at the trauma. So I want to separate the feeling from the behavior. I don't see this a whole lot in the literature. So I don't know if you're going to see that part in the book, because I don't remember the book anymore. I read it a long time ago. I should reread it. But I want to separate the feeling, the triggering events, and the trick. So then you can go a little further and say, what did she do that triggered those three feelings? You can do that too. What did she do, or what did he do that triggered that? But it's not as important as understanding the triggering vulnerability, the feeling. It is. I take that back. It is important to know what triggered, because a big part of the trauma treatment in interpersonal work is to separate the parental figures or the triggering person from the partner. In other words, let's say sexual abuse. Part of what happens in sexual abuse treatment of victims, which is a trauma, is that they get re-triggered by their partner. But if they can think of their partner as being a partner in healing, one of the things they will figure out is that I need to stop thinking that when my partner wants sex, he's pressuring me for sex like my professor did when I was doing my PhD. He just wants sex. So some of it is differentiation, but some of it is being able to put a distance between you get triggered as if he were your sexually abusing professor, but he's really not your sexually abusing professor. He's an adult, intimate partner that you're trying to create a relationship with. And so part of the work is on differentiating the childhood response to the trauma and the stretching of the adult to become more adult. It is 12:28. I want to hear a couple of comments about how helpful this last piece was about the exercise.
I felt that was really helpful. I mean, that really helps me to think, put more context around it and gives them more tools to be able to articulate it, maybe not take it so personally. So I thought it was helpful. I liked that it was a little more descriptive. I mean, and some of the details of their feelings. So that was helpful.
Great. I'm glad. Anything you want to say, Monica?
Yeah, I think it's helpful. And one thing I want to say is it's helpful for me, this just in general, this kind of thing, because it's a kind of praxis. Like this kind of thing might not have been as meaningful for me 6 months ago as it is now because of what I'm experiencing with my clients. And so it's like, oh, I see exactly how this really helps. So for part of the reason that's why this tool is helpful, but also I think that thinking about and reading about and planning and what not in my head, all of what I know about these dynamics and things that are going on with people, I think takes me to a different space. And this worksheet gets back to the very basic of what was the person feeling and what is the behavior, which is just helpful to remember, because sometimes I think when something is so intense, it's like, oh, I've got to use the whole of all that I know about this. And it's easy to forget the most basic things, I think.
It breaks it down a little more. Thank you for saying that. So I want you to know, when I ask if something is helpful, I don't really necessarily need to hear that it was. You know, if you think this is not helpful, it's okay to tell me too. I'm not gonna get upset. So
Yeah, no, but it is very helpful.
I usually think articulating what is helpful for the student, you know, for the members of the academy,
Mhm.
to consolidate the learning. Okay, so thank you so much for your presence and your contributions. Your questions were excellent. And keep your confidence in what you're doing, because every time I hear a question, I feel like you know where you're taking people. It's you need more help in trying to figure out how to get them there.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. This is so helpful.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.